What's up, War Rapport family? We are back with another great edition of Building Rapport. Joining me, as always, is one of my favorite guests, host of the Late Kick on 247, Josh Pate, joins me to talk a little Auburn football. Josh has struck right in. Auburn lost to New Mexico State 31-10. It was tragic. It was tragic for a lot of Auburn fans. How did this happen? Let's start with how did this happen? How does a team on a 3-game winning streak lay an egg versus New Mexico State?
Yeah, so there was a time back in the day where I was not supposed to let our dog in the house. And so one of the first times my parents let me stay home alone, I let Toby in the house. And he did what an outdoor dog does in the house. So when my parents got back home, I thought it was immediately just going to be punishment time. But before we got to that, my dad just looked at me and said, "How did this happen?" He just had a bewildered look on, how did this happen? And I was at Oregon State last week. So I'm not watching the Auburn-New Mexico State game for what I thought were obvious reasons. And I'm scrolling scores on my phone. And I kind of go past the Auburn-New Mexico State. And then I come back and honest to God, I think it is an inversion. Like, I think the system's messed up and Auburn beat them 31-10. And so you go to like CBSSports.com and you look at their scoreboard and all the scoreboards say the same thing. And I realized what had happened. And at that point, I'm asking the question you're asking, and I still don't have an answer for it. I went back and watched the game. I saw what happened, but I don't have an answer for it. But what my mind did was it quickly shifted over towards, okay, what does this mean for the future? Like, how does this impact things? So, I'm from Columbus or just north of there. So I grew up with a ton of Auburn buddies, still got a ton of Auburn buddies. And so a lot of them, I got in a group text and about 5 or 6 of them just said, this can't happen at Auburn. Like, this can never be allowed to happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, it happened. So if you say it can't happen and it does happen, what's next? And they were implying, like, if you're the coach here, this can't happen. Okay, well, does that mean if it does happen, you just fire the coach immediately? Obviously, You guys aren't saying that. So it can happen. It did happen. Now what? Doesn't mean it's acceptable by any stretch, but it did happen. So now what? And I go back, when I was down there for the Georgia game, I go back to Friday before the Georgia game. I was in the facility. Talked with a lot of folks. Some of them I hadn't seen in a while. Some of them I met for the first time. But I remember just how brutally honest those guys were about where they are right now, what they have, what they inherited, where they want to be, what it's going to take to get there. And they knew we're not close to being there. We're not close. Right. And it wasn't that they were trying to build in excuses. They actually weren't at all. They were semi-confident they could compete with Georgia the next day. And they did, by the way. But they knew long-term, there's a significant overhaul that's going to happen here. So my point there is, when you have a situation like that on your hands, people don't believe it until they see it. But when you have a situation like that on your hands, it doesn't mean you're going to get crushed every week. Hugh's a very good coach. He's a very good offensive mind. He's got some good players on that team enough to where if everything clicks on a Saturday, you could lead Georgia in the fourth quarter. You could be tied with them in the fourth quarter. But a team like that has such a low basement that if you don't bring it, there's no limit to how bad you can be. Like, there is no limit to how poorly you can perform. And, a team like Alabama, you saw them against South Florida, I think, play the worst game a Nick Saban team's ever played. They still won 17-3 because the floor on that team is so high, much relatively higher, speaking. It's impossible for them to lose that game. That's not the case with what Hugh Freeze has right now. There is no floor. So if you don't bring it, and you play your D+ or D- or F game, you will lose to some of the worst teams in America, especially when they're up to play you because you put $1.85 million in their pocket and told them you're here to lose. So my point in all of that is, it doesn't change who Hugh Freeze is as a coach. It doesn't change what needs to happen. It doesn't change what their game plan is moving forward. It's just a baseball bat to the face. It's a startling reminder of where you are. And in case anyone off of that Arkansas win had developed any illusions that, oh, maybe we're way further along than we thought we were. No, you're not. You are the same team that blew out Arkansas, that just lost in blowout fashion in New Mexico State. That alone, Mike, that 8-day period shows you the extremes of what's possible when your roster and your program is in this much a transitioning phase and this much a state of flux. And it is never believable until it happens in front of your face.
Yeah, I hear you, Josh. I wonder, though, if this is the extreme of having Hugh Freeze as head coach. I'll tell you, my Ole Miss fans after the game said, welcome to the Hugh Freeze experience. You will beat Alabama and then frustratingly lose some game that you were not supposed to lose. So we'll see how Auburn does moving forward. Obviously, the Iron Bowl is coming. I want to pivot quickly here to the upcoming matchup. This is a man who owns 2 wins versus Nick Saban, about to go up against Nick Saban for the first time. You know, given what happened last weekend, which Auburn do we see? Do we see the Auburn that almost beat Georgia at home or hung in, or you had a lead on Georgia at home 10-0? Or do we see last week's Auburn? You know, what do you do to shake this loss off and get your team mentally prepared for what will be the toughest game of the season?
I don't know that you do. Honestly, I think what happened last Saturday is
sticks with you.
It's what's so far out of the realm of believability. I think even wasn't it Freeze himself that said Monday there's still kind of a fog over the program.
He did.
I hope we can. Yeah. So trust me, even if that's the case in your program, normally you don't say it publicly. If I had to guess, if I was Hugh Freeze and I was saying that, that's me building a safety net in for what could be coming Saturday. That's me thinking out loud. That's not him telling me that or anything like that. But I think they know they got an uphill battle. Bama's surging. I certainly think because of the history of this game in that building, you could have lost to Auburn High School last week, and Bama would not be overlooking you. There's just no shot of that happening. So
yeah, if
you're competitive with them, or you end up shocking the world and getting a win, it'll be because you beat them. They're not handing you that game. And I know, trust me, I know as well as anyone what's happened there before. It would really, really surprise me if that was a competitive game, like deep into the fourth quarter, because it's the same dynamic I feel with Georgia, Tennessee last week, maybe a little more extreme on the Auburn side. Tennessee had started this trajectory. And the thing about it, Mike, is if you're looking like this right here in late September, there's time to pull the nose up. But teams who start dipping in November, normally that's just what it's going to be the rest of the year. And we got 1 week left. Conversely, Alabama, they beat LSU, and they had that road game against Kentucky, which normally would be a trap game. And they just went up there and annihilated Kentucky. They're doing the exact same thing Georgia's doing. They're right here. And so last week, odds makers tried to tell you, Georgia, Tennessee, watch out. It wasn't competitive because the teams were going different directions. And I feel like that's Auburn, Alabama right now. So what the line's like 14 or 14.5, I think that's a lot of history baked in.
Yeah,
I think there's a wider gap than that on the field this Saturday. But look, whether Auburn loses by 40 or loses by 10 in a competitive game where Bama has a late touchdown to put it out of reach, I don't know that I feel any different about what the future needs to hold for them, because I just don't change my opinion that much over 4 quarters. Even this last week, I didn't really change all that much. I just look at it and say, wow, that's going to sting for decades. That's a really embarrassing loss. Folks are going to throw it in your face forever, but it doesn't change the task at hand. And it doesn't change whether the guy who's the head coach is qualified. He either was or wasn't before last Saturday, and he either is or isn't before this Saturday.
Josh, I want to pivot to something that you and I have talked about previously and repeatedly, something that this staff has openly focused on in Hugh Freeze's first year, and that's recruiting. Now, we've gone back and forth about the importance or non-importance of proof of concept. How much does this loss against New Mexico State hurt you in recruiting? And how much can you pick that up against Alabama? Top 15 prospect Cam Coleman was in the house at Jordan-Hare. I think a lot of people are anticipating that he will decommit from Texas A&M, given Jimbo's midseason firing. What can they do here in recruiting to try to close this talent gap and raise that floor?
Yeah, so as you said, we've talked about this before. So you got one of 2 tracks that you're trying to focus on this time of year.
Sure.
If you're good, you're packaging up what's happening on the field, and that's obvious. That's easy. You just parlay that and you rub it against recruiting, and hopefully dividends pay off. But if you're not doing well, that's when your mettle as a coaching staff, as a recruiting staff really shows, because that's when you have to be able to take bad results on the field and package them. You would think you want to throw them away. No. There's an effective way to package it, but you have to be good at it. You have to be a really good salesman, because you got to package crap and you've got to take it into a living room, and you've got to convince a kid, no. You want this because this with you wouldn't look like what it looks like in my hands. This Auburn sticker would be glowing instead of, on a pile of crap that is our season this year, because we don't have players like you. And you got to do that over and over and over again. And you've got to get a group of kids. You got to get a nucleus of a class to buy into the concept that we're going to be the class that turns it around. That's how every overhaul and rebuild has happened in the history of this game. Auburn would be no different. And I know last Saturday begs to differ, but it's not like there's a Grand Canyon between them and respectability again. It can be as quick as one class and some additions from the portal, and then you start building onto that, because then hopefully next year you get some returns on that investment. But look, you don't have a rookie coaching staff down there. You got guys who have done it. They understand how it works. I can assure anyone who's watching this, they have got as realistic a perspective on what it's going to take as any coaching staff I'm around. And they know exactly what it's going to take, and they're ready to do it. At the same time, that's a two-way street. You got to get the kids to commit to you. You can't just be all in on the kids. I think they'll be okay. I'd be lying if I said last week didn't dampen that. You can't lose like that and not have it dampen that. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but the best staffs out there do understand how to make that sort of a Teflon situation where that loss bounces off of them, because somehow, some way they're able to mind trick kids into thinking, no. Yeah, this right here was bad, but with you in the house, it wouldn't be that bad. And look, hey, if we're losing like this, obviously there's an immediate playing time available. So come to Auburn and let's remake Auburn together.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, I think, to see how kids respond to this. I'm really interested. Auburn has had a very tough history at the receiver and the quarterback position, right? So developing quarterbacks out of high school and then getting receivers, top level receivers, to commit. It has been difficult, I think, when you don't have any proof of concept in the passing game, or they maybe, if you're Cam Coleman, you're thinking, all right, is the guy that's going to throw me the ball next year on campus right now? I wonder how they'll sell that. I agree with you. You have to be a good salesman. Josh, I want to close. You alluded to the fact that you think that this won't be close in the fourth quarter. Give me your score prediction and why. How does this happen?
Let me see. I actually may have it pulled up. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I do. So the model in front of me we got Alabama winning by 17. We got Bama winning by 18 points. That's if I were to simulate 100 times, which is a boring way to break that down. That's about where I would go. I'm trying to pull your screen back up. I lost you. All right, there you go. Look, that doesn't mean you don't have to walk into a hornet's nest and withstand the early storm. That's what always happens in the Iron Bowl. But I think Alabama's good enough to stretch that and pull away late. I would probably go somewhere between 14 and 21. That's probably where I think it lands.
14 and 21.
I've told you my philosophy in the past.
Okay, all right.
Predicting scores is a fool's errand. Never nail yourself down, because what happens is, if I tell you, man, I think Alabama's offense is going to roll this Saturday, and that's why they win. I think Bama wins 42-30, and then they win 9-6. I was right, and I was still wrong. So at least if I say Bama's going to win and I don't hammer myself down on a score, you don't know if my philosophy was off or not.
I hear you. Listen, I've been deadly accurate this year in score predictions for Auburn. A lot of fans, the LSU game, Josh, I said Auburn loses this game, 45-17. And people were like, you think they're going to score 45 on Auburn's defense? I said, yes, I do think they're going to put that on Auburn's defense. Obviously, I think 48-18 was the score. So pretty close in the ballpark. I see Alabama north of 40 in this one. I know great things can happen in Jordan-Hare Stadium when the stars align and, Dr. Strange comes over from the multiverse and put something in the air for Auburn. I just don't see it happening this year. Late season, like you talked about the late season, this loss to New Mexico State came at the absolute worst time. I think if you wanted to have a chance in this game. I know Auburn fans are going to hope that I'm wrong, but unfortunately I've been very right this season. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. I want to thank Josh Pate of The Late Kick on 247 for joining me again for another great Building Rapport segment. Guys, if you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are The War Rapport on every social media platform, TW Rapport on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.